Hi YouTube, it's Joshua Miles and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be covering another solved true crime case from my Curious Case series. I apologise if you can hear any DIY noises going on. It snowed last night and naturally my dad has decided to completely renovate the front room, so sorry about that. Today's case is another UK case that I'm going to be covering, and it is quite a big complex case, so please bear with me. I just like to point out this video has not been made to cause disrespect or anything like that. It's just been made to spread awareness about this case by compiling information from various different public sources on the internet. Now, though that being said, let's delve right into this case. Derrick Bird, born November 27th, 1957, was a 52-year-old man who would end up destroying the lives of more than 12 families. He was born to Joseph and Mary Bird in Whitehaven, Cumbria, which is in England. He had a twin brother, David, and one older brother. Derrick had a fairly irregular childhood growing up in Whitehaven, and he eventually fell in love and got married. And he got married to a woman named Linda Mills. Together, the couple had 2 children, Graeme and Jamie. I'm not sure if Graeme is how you pronounce it. I'm going to put it on the screen now, but please correct me down in the comments below if you actually know how to pronounce his name. After the birth of their first child, Graeme, everything seemed to be going as planned. Everything was going along happily. However, things quickly went astray, and then leading up to and after the birth of their second child, Jamie, the couple split up. And that happened in early 1994. Linda left Derrick Bird and moved to Lamplugh in Cumbria. She moved with the 2 children, and Derrick stayed in the village of Rower, I think it's pronounced, which was also in Cumbria. Lamplugh is also where Derrick's twin brother David lives. Now let's talk about Derrick. Derrick was self-employed. He was a taxi driver, and as a taxi driver he serviced the Rower area and the surrounding towns and villages. He was described by his friends as a good lad, a normal bloke, and a nice guy. On May 22nd of 2010, Derrick became a granddad when his eldest son, Graeme, gave birth to a son called Leighton. 2 weeks later, on June 2nd, 2010, Derrick Bird would commit one of the worst criminal acts in British history involving a firearm.
Now, just to tell you the story that's developing back here, and we've been getting details of just in the last 10 minutes or so, news from police in Cumbria that police have been called to a street in Cumbria after reports that shots were fired by a man. Now, there seems to be a sizable police and emergency services operation going on. This, if you know the area, this is in Duke Street in Whitehaven. Ambulance crews at the scene and armed police are trying to apprehend the man, and crucially, police are asking members of the public in Whitehaven and Egremont to stay indoors until further notice.
Okay, so before you go any further, like I said at the start of the video, this case is quite complex and there's a lot going on, so there's a lot of places and names, so I'm trying to present this in a way that's more easy to follow along, but if you do get lost, you just have to go back. You just gotta stick with me with this. I'm sorry if it just get confusing at any point, but there is a lot of places and a lot of people involved. I am going to try and make it as clear as possible. In the early hours of June 2nd, 2010, Derrick left his home in Rower, Cumbria, and drove his Citroen Picasso to the nearby town of Lamplugh. When he got to Lamplugh, he drove straight to his twin brother David's house. When David opened the door to his 52-year-old brother Derrick, Derrick shot him 11 times in the head and body with a .22 caliber rifle. As you can imagine, that amount of injury resulted in David's death. Derrick then got back into his car and drove to Frizzington. Now, Frizzington was the home of the Bird family solicitor, who was 60-year-old Kevin Commons. Derrick arrived at the house, knocked on the door, and Kevin answered. And when Kevin saw the guns, he tried to escape Derrick. However, Derrick prevented him by shooting him twice with a double-barreled shotgun. However, out of those 2 shots, only one of those shots actually hit Kevin, and that shot hit him in the shoulder. Kevin, who had attempted to escape Derrick by getting into his car, staggered out of his car and into the entrance to his farmyard. This is where Derrick fired 2 more shots, but this time he shot him with his rifle, and this time he aimed for Kevin's head. Kevin died instantly. At about 10:20 a.m, a neighbour phoned for the police. The neighbour was actually a witness of the brutal attack and called the Cumbria constabulary to report the murder of Kevin Commons. However, her call was actually delayed by several minutes after the attack actually happened. And this was because the neighbour was panicking big time. As you can imagine, you've just seen your neighbour got shot and she went into a complete state of shock and had no idea what to do. So she had to talk to her neighbours first to find out what she should do. This same witness described Derrick to have been using an air rifle, despite the fact that there were clear gunshots heard. After brutally murdering Kevin Commons, Derrick got back into his car and drove away, and he drove to his friend's house. Now, the reason he had driven to his friend's house was because he had actually lent that friend a shotgun, and Derrick wanted the shotgun back. However, when he got to this friend's house, he knocked on the door and the person who answered wasn't his friend. It was actually his friend's wife, and his friend's wife didn't have access to the gun. Disgruntled, Derrick left his friend's property at about 10:33 a.m. and then he drove his taxi to a taxi rank, which was on Duke Street, Whitehaven. Now, when he got to the taxi rank, he called another taxi driver over to the car, and this taxi driver was a friend of his who was called Darren Rucastle. Derrick had actually had quite a few conflicts with Darren, who was 43 years old, and this was due to Darren's behaviour and Darren poaching fares. There had even been an incident where Darren had damaged the tyres on Derrick's taxi and then openly boasted about it to his friends and other taxi drivers. As Darren approached Derrick's taxi, Derrick pulled out a .22 caliber rifle, the same rifle he was using in the past 2 attacks, and shot him at point-blank range. The shots hit Darren in the lower face, the chest, and the abdomen. Darren quickly succumbed to his injuries and perished. Quickly after killing Darren Rucastle, Derrick drove up alongside another taxi driver, and this taxi driver was 57-year-old Donald Reed. Derrick then proceeded to shoot Donald in the back. This first shot didn't actually kill Donald, and Derrick realized this, and he drove out of the taxi rank, looped around, and came back into the taxi rank and shot again. He fired at Donald twice before driving off. Fortunately for Donald Reed, both these 2 shots missed him, and he would survive this shooting. As Derrick drove away from the taxi rank, he pulled alongside another taxi driver, and this taxi driver was called Paul Wilson, who was 34 years old. Paul was walking down Scotch Street, and Derrick called him over to his car, in the same fashion that he had done with Darren. As Paul approached Derrick's taxi, Derrick shot him in the right side of his face with the shotgun, which severely wounded him. Now, word of these shootings, as you can imagine, quickly began to spread, and it got to a group of unarmed police officers at the local police station. And these unarmed police officers decided to follow Derrick as he drove down Coach Road. While Derrick was driving down Coach Road, he fired his shotgun at a passing taxi. The shot injured the male driver of the taxi, who was a 53-year-old man named Terry Kennedy. The shot also injured a 20-year-old girl who was a passenger in the taxi, who was called Emma Percival. Derrick wasn't stupid, and he quickly noticed the unarmed police officers that were trailing behind him. So he got his shotgun and aimed at the 2 of them. There was only 2 unarmed police officers following Derrick. Now, the 2 unarmed police officers naturally dove to take cover because obviously they didn't want to get shot, and Derrick used this to his advantage. He used this distraction to make his escape. Now, those were all the shootings that, to the police and investigators, they believed to have been targeted shooting. Derrick shot those people for a specific reason. What happens next takes this whole case to a whole new level. Derrick decides to start shooting strangers at random. Residents of Whitehaven and the nearby towns of Egremont and Seascale were instructed by the authorities to remain inside. As you can imagine, a massive manhunt for Derrick was launched by the police to try and end the shootings. When Derrick drove away from the 2 unarmed police officers, he drove towards the village of Egremont. Just before getting into the village of Egremont, Derrick called a woman named Jacqueline Williamson over to his taxi before shooting her. Fortunately, Jacqueline managed to escape without injury with her dog, who she was out walking at the time of the attack. Derrick then drove into the town of Egremont and stopped his car alongside a 57-year-old woman named Susan Hughes. Susan was walking home from a day's shopping when Derrick pulled up alongside her. Derrick then shot her in the chest and abdomen with the shotgun. Derrick then got out of his taxi and got into a struggle with Susan. However, the struggle didn't last long when Derrick pulled out his rifle and shot her in the back back of the head, killing her. Derrick then got back into his taxi and drove the short distance to Bridge End Road. Walking in the opposite direction to the direction that Derrick's taxi was going was 71-year-old Kenneth Fishburne. Derrick Bird fired his shotgun at Kenneth and hit him in the head and chest, causing fatal injuries. Derrick then continued down the road in his taxi until he came across 59-year-old Leslie Hunter. Derrick called Leslie over to his car in the same fashion that he had done with two of his previous victims before taking out his shotgun and shooting Leslie in the face at point-blank range. Leslie quickly turned around to protect himself from being shot, and as a result of this, he was shot again in the back by Derrick. Miraculously, despite being shot twice, one at point-blank range, Leslie Hunter survived the attack. Derrick then went on south to the village of Thornhill. That's when he came across a teenage girl named Ashley Glaister. He beckoned Ashley over to his taxi in the same manner that he has done with all the other victims before firing his shotgun at her. Fortunately, this shot missed Ashley.
He was in the car and he stopped me and said something to me, and I didn't know what he said, so I said what, and then he came back up to me and said, do you like something? But I couldn't hear what he said, and then when I turned around to look at him, he was pointing a gun in my face. And then I held onto my head and put my head down because I was scared, and then he shot it, and then when I was running off, he shot it again. I was dead scared, and I was crying because I thought that I was going to die and he was going to kill me, and I didn't know what I'd done wrong for him to kill me.
Derrick quickly drove off and passed through the village of Carlton before driving towards the village of Wilton. A member of the diving club that Derrick was a part of actually lived in Wilton and was a friend of Derrick. And Derrick had decided to visit his friend, and this friend was called Jason Carey. However, when Derrick knocked on the door, Jason's wife answered. Derrick decided to leave, and he got back into his taxi and drove away. As Derrick drove through the village of Wilton, he came across 68-year-old Jennifer Jackson and her husband, 67-year-old James Jackson, and they had gone out for a nice late morning stroll. Derrick pulled up alongside Jennifer Jackson and shot her in the chest with his shotgun and then twice in the head with the rifle, killing her. Derrick then drove away and reportedly got as far as Townhead Farm before turning around and driving back towards Wilton. When he got back to Wilton, he fired his shotgun at Jennifer's husband, James Jackson, fatally hitting him in the head. Derrick then decided to drive his car back to Carlton, which was the village that he just passed through earlier, where he fired his shotgun at close range at a mole catcher who was talking to a farmer stood in a field. He fired his shotgun twice at this mole catcher at quite a close range. This mole catcher was 65-year-old Isaac Dixon. Nearby, a former semi-professional rugby league player was working in a field outside the Red Admiral Hotel. This rugby player was 31-year-old Gary Purdom, who was shot and killed by Derrick. Derrick then decided to drive towards Seascale. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it. It may be Seascally or something like that. Please correct me down below in the comments if you know how to pronounce this town name. Strangely, as Derrick drove towards Seascale, he actually began driving quite slowly and started beckoning other motorists to pass him as he drove down the road. This turned out to be another technique that he was using to shoot motorists. He shot a 23-year-old motorist named James Jamie Clark in the head with his shotgun. This caused James to crash his car so severely that authorities were unsure whether he initially died of being shot in the head or of the really bad car crash. Derrick then came to a narrow one-way passage which was underneath a train bridge. It was at this passage that he encountered another motorist named Harry Berger. Harry was 40 years old. Harry saw Derrick drive up and approach the passage from the other side, so he politely beckoned Derrick to come through the passage first before he would go through the passage in the opposite direction. As Derrick drove through the passage and then past Harry's car, he shot him twice. Harry suffered severe injuries to his right arm. Derrick then drove his car along the seafront and onto Drigg Road, where he fired his gun twice at 64-year-old Michael Pike. The first shot actually missed Michael, but the second shot hit Michael in the head, killing him instantly.
Around about 4 o'clock, I phoned my brother, and he said that Dad still hadn't come home and that they were getting really worried, but there'd been no news, and they hadn't been able to get him on his mobile. So then a couple of minutes later, one of the neighbours, who used to be a policeman, he'd gone to look, and he told my brother that more than likely my dad.
Only a few moments later, and on the same street, Derrick called over 66-year-old Jane Robinson to his taxi. Derrick then proceeded to shoot Jane in the neck and head at point-blank range, which unfortunately killed her. Now, during these last two shootings on the seafront, 3 armed response vehicles had been pursuing Derrick from afar and had driven to the passage where Harry had been shot in the side. However, due to Harry's injuries, Harry had actually blocked the passage with his vehicle, and his vehicle had to be pushed out of the way to allow these armed response units to pass through the passage. Witnesses then described Derrick's driving as becoming erratic as he continued to drive down the seafront. At 11:33 a.m, just an hour after Derrick had shot his family solicitor, Kevin Commons, police constables Philip Lewis and Andrew Levelak spotted Derrick as his car passed their vehicle. The police constables then attempted to pursue Derrick, but due to roadworks they were delayed and lost sight of Derrick, so the pursuit only lasted for a few minutes. Derrick then drove into Exdale Valley, where he then proceeded to shoot 70-year-old Jacqueline Lewis. He shot Jacqueline in the neck with his rifle as she was out walking. Fortunately, Jacqueline wasn't fatally wounded by the attack and she survived. Derrick continued to drive through Eskdale Valley when he stopped by a 51-year-old woman named Fiona Moretta. Just like with so many of his previous victims, Derrick beckons Fiona over to his vehicle. Fiona believed that Derrick was going to ask for directions, so she leans through the passenger window of Derrick's taxi. That is when Derrick shot Fiona in the chest with his rifle before taking off towards the village of Boot. When Derrick got to the village of Boot, he stopped outside the business premises of Sims Travel and fired his rifle at nearby people, and fortunately all those shots missed. He then continued into the village and began firing at just random people that were on the streets with his gun. But thankfully every single shot that he fired missed. Derrick then fired his rifle at 2 men, and those shots unfortunately hit. Those shots hit and severely wounded 25-year-old Nathan Jones in the face. Derrick then continued driving until he came across a couple that had stopped their car and got out to take a photograph. He fired at the couple, hitting 30-year-old Samantha Christie in the face, causing severe wounds. Derrick then told Samantha Christie's partner, Craig Russ, to run. Derrick then fired at Craig as he ran away, but fortunately all his shots missed him, and Craig escaped uninjured. Derrick then drove on. He then came across 2 cyclists which Derrick fired at and missed. However, this shooting actually caused Derrick to lose control of his vehicle and crash it into several other cars and then into a brick wall. This crash badly damaged a tyre on Derrick's taxi. Derrick then continued to attempt to drive his taxi until he abandoned it at a local beauty spot called Doctor's Bridge, which was just outside of Boots. A nearby family of 4 who were completely unaware that the shootings had taken place and completely unaware that he had guns approached Derrick asking if he needed any help or any assistance. However, Derrick turned them down and surprisingly told them to leave immediately. Derrick then took the rifle from his taxi and walked towards a bridge that led towards Oak Howe Woods. Derrick Bird was last seen alive at 12:30 that day. Shortly after 12:30, authorities and police confirmed that there had been multiple fatalities and that they were searching for a suspect. They then announced that the suspect was driving a dark grey Citroen Picasso and that the suspect was Derrick Bird. At about 12:36, just 6 minutes after Derrick was last seen alive, armed police officers and dog handlers showed up at the scene of Derrick's abandoned car, and they began an extensive search in and around the areas and in the woods for Derrick. An hour and a half later, at 2 p.m, police announced that they had found a body in the woods with a rifle and that they believed this body to be the body of Derrick Bird. Police confirmed shortly afterwards that the members of public that had been told and instructed to remain indoors can now go about their daily business. The brutal shootings had come to an end. Overall, 12 people were shot and killed, and a further 11 people were injured before Derrick took his own life. Later that evening, at a police conference in Whitehaven, the police confirmed these details, saying that 12 people had been killed, 11 people had been shot and injured, 3 of them critically injured. They also confirmed 2 weapons that were used, a double-barrel shotgun and a .22 caliber rifle, which they have recovered. And the rifle had a scope and a silencer on it, and that they suspected that these 2 guns were used in the attacks. 30 different crime scenes were also being investigated. The shootings were considered to be the worst mass casualty shootings in the United Kingdom since the 1996 Dunblane School massacre, which left 18 people dead. The shootings took place over a 50-mile stretch of Cumbrian coastline, and helicopters from all over the country and the RAF were used in the manhunt and to recover casualties and take them to hospital. Derrick Bird surprisingly had actually been a licensed firearm holder, and the shootings sparked further debate about gun control in the United Kingdom. Now you may be asking yourself, what the hell were the motives for all these shootings? And the answer is the police doesn't really know for sure, but they have some suspicions. In 2007, 3 years before the attack, Derrick Bird had been attacked by a group of men and knocked unconscious. These 4 men had used his taxi services and then refused to pay. They tried to run away instead of paying for the taxi services and consequently decided to beat Derrick unconscious. Afterwards, Derrick's friends and families claimed that he had changed, that he wasn't the same as he was before. There was an unconfirmed report that Derrick had attempted to get help from a local hospital due to his fragile mental state. However, like I said, this is unconfirmed and may just be rumour. Derrick had held a shotgun license since 1974 and often renewed it. The most recent time he renewed it was in 2005. He also, in 2007, obtained a license and certificate for his rifle. Interestingly, Derrick was actually being investigated by HM Revenue and Customs, which, if you're not familiar with the UK government, is essentially the tax office. And we'll get back to why this piece of information is significant later on. So there are very few speculated motives in this case. So let's go through what we know. There'd been speculation that Derrick had held a grudge against the Sellafield nuclear power plant and people associated with it. This was because he used to work at the power plant as a joiner, but he was forcibly resigned in 1990 due to allegations of him stealing wood from the power plant. And Derrick was actually convicted of this theft and served a 12-month suspended sentence. However, all this happening 12 years prior to the shootings makes me question its relevancy. Interestingly, 3 of the deceased victims of the Cumbria shootings actually worked at this power plant. However, there was no evidence to suggest that these 3 victims had anything to do with Derrick's forced resignation. I also have to point out that a lot of people work at nuclear power plants, and at the Sellafield nuclear power plant they directly employed almost 10,000 people. And as the nuclear power plant was located in Seascale, Cumbria, it doesn't surprise me that some of the victims have turned out to be employees of the nuclear power plants, because people who worked at the nuclear power plants would naturally be living close to the nuclear power plants, if that makes any sense. So I personally find it a bit hard to believe that Derrick went on these shootings randomly one day due to a grudge that he held 20 years previously. And especially considering he started the shootings by killing his twin brother and his family solicitor, neither of which worked at the power plant. Terry Kennedy, who was one of Derrick's best friends and who was actually injured in these shootings, claimed that Derrick had had a relationship with a girl from Thailand, who he had met when he went on holiday to Pattaya, Thailand. Another friend of Derrick's furthered this claim and added that he had actually sent the girl £1,000, and after receiving the money, the girl had apparently just ended the relationship in one text message. Derrick's friends described Derrick as being made a fool out of, which could have been why he went on this sudden rampage, although I still don't think this is the motive. It is also speculated that Derrick had been in some kind of family feud due to his father's will. This theory is supported by the fact that he first murdered his twin and then he murdered the family solicitor, but it doesn't explain why he murdered any of the other taxi drivers at the taxi rank who were considered to be his friends and then went on a random killing spree. Now let's go back and talk about the tax investigation that was being conducted by HM Revenue and Customs. The investigation was centered around tax evasion, and this meant that Derrick could be sent to prison, and this meant that Derrick was being threatened with potential prosecution and punishments. According to Mark Cooper, who was a taxi driver who has known Derrick for more than 15 years, he claims that Derrick had actually accumulated £60,000, that's right, £60,000 in a secret bank account, and that Derrick had expressed his concern to him that HM Revenue and Customs might find out about this the £60,000 and, you know, chase him for the tax rate or fine him or prosecute him for not paying tax on this secret money that he had kept. Mark Cooper then went on to say that Derrick believed that his twin brother David and the family solicitor were conspiring to send him to prison for tax evasion. Interestingly enough, 3 days before the killings, Derrick called his brother 44 times. However, it's unsure whether these were unanswered phone calls or answered phone calls. And that's all there really is to this case. I'm personally more inclined to believe the tax evasion theory, because that kind of makes a lot of sense why you'd kill your brother and your solicitor, because you think they're trying to dob you in for tax evasion, and then because you've told this secret to other taxi drivers, maybe that you've accumulated £60,000, maybe you think that they, you know, let it slip or told someone or reported on you or that kind of thing. Still, none of it justifies anything that happens at all. I just think that maybe this theory makes more sense to me. Perhaps the reason that his twin brother and the solicitor were going to dob him in in the first place is because something to do with the father's will. Maybe if Derrick was in prison, he couldn't, you know, have something from the will or something like that. It could be very intricate, but we're not too sure what is going on. There are a few other theories in this case which are really, really wild and a bit crazy that I didn't feel comfortable discussing, all to do with there being a second shooter, or that this mysterious £60,000 was payment for him to do this from the government or something like that. But that's just a little bit too wild, and I really want to remain respectful. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I want to remain respectful to the victims and the families and everyone who was involved in this case. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this episode in my Curious Case True Crime series. If you're new here, I usually upload 2 videos a week, although the past 2 weeks I've only been doing 1 video a week. That's just because I felt really burnt out and there's things been going on in my personal life, but I'm really going to try to get back on doing the 2 videos a week. I always make sure I upload my Sunday video, which is a Curious Case True Crime video, which is at 8 PM UK time every Sunday. Sometimes a little later than that, depending on how fast my internet is for uploading the video. And the other video I do on Wednesdays at 8 PM, which is a conspiracy theory video or another kind of video. So be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time that I post. Now, with all that being said, I will see you in the next video. And stopped his car alongside a 57-year-old woman named Susan Hughes. And stopped his... They employed directly almost 10,000 people. Can you freaking stop drilling?